I am Miranda, 35 years old, and my daughter Sophie is 8. We have been through a nightmare that I never imagined would happen after my divorce from Mark. When Sophie was diagnosed with severe celiac disease, I never thought her own father would put her health at risk because his new girlfriend Jennifer convinced him I was being controlling. The day my baby ended up in the hospital because they fed her regular pizza was the day I knew I had to fight harder than ever before for her safety. Before I tell you how my daughter ended up in the hospital because of my ex's stubbornness, let me know where you're watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you've ever had to fight for your child's well-being despite others not believing you. Teaching elementary school has always been my passion. I love watching children learn and grow, and I especially enjoy bringing my creativity into the classroom. Before everything happened, I was known for my elaborate science projects and the healthy snacks I would prepare for special occasions. Cooking was my way of showing love both to my students and especially to my family. My life changed forever when Sophie was 5 years old. She had always been a happy, energetic child, but suddenly she started experiencing mysterious symptoms. It began with constant stomach aches after meals. Then came the extreme fatigue that seemed unusual for such a young, previously active child. She developed a rash on her elbows and knees that no amount of lotion would soothe. The most alarming was her sudden weight loss and stunted growth. While other kindergartners were growing out of their clothes, Sophie's still hung loosely on her small frame. We went to doctor after doctor seeking answers. Some suggested it was just a sensitive stomach. Others thought it might be stress from starting school. One even hinted that I was being over-anxious as a mother. Those words stung, but I knew something was seriously wrong with my child. I could see it in her pale face and the dark circles under her eyes. Finally, after 6 months of appointments, a pediatric gastroenterologist suggested testing Sophie for celiac disease. When the results came back positive, I felt an overwhelming mix of emotions. Relief at finally having an answer, but also fear about what this diagnosis meant for Sophie's future. The doctor explained that celiac disease was an autoimmune disorder where eating gluten causes damage to the small intestine. Even tiny amounts of gluten could trigger an immune response that would harm Sophie's body. The solution seemed simple enough: remove all gluten from Sophie's diet. But implementing this was far more complicated than I had imagined. Gluten is hidden in so many unexpected places, from soy sauce to medicine to Play-Doh. Our entire kitchen needed to be reorganized to prevent cross-contamination. I spent hours researching safe products, calling manufacturers, and learning to bake with unfamiliar flours. Mark, my husband at the time, was skeptical from the beginning. "Are you sure this isn't just one of those fad diets?" he asked after the diagnosis. "Everyone seems to be going gluten-free these days. Maybe the doctors are just jumping on the bandwagon." I showed him the test results, the images of Sophie's damaged intestines, the research papers about celiac disease. He would nod along, but I could tell he wasn't fully convinced. His own mother had reinforced his doubts, mentioning that nobody had food allergies when she was raising children, and that kids today were too sheltered from germs. Before Sophie's diagnosis, our marriage had been happy, or so I thought. We met in college, married young, and built our life together deliberately. Mark worked in finance while I taught, and we saved carefully to buy our modest home in a good school district. We had routines and traditions, date nights and inside jokes. The foundation seemed solid, but the stress of Sophie's medical issues exposed cracks I hadn't noticed before. While I threw myself into learning everything I could about celiac disease and creating a safe environment for Sophie, Mark began staying later at work. He complained about the higher grocery bills, the time spent cooking separate meals, the limitations on where we could eat out. "You're becoming obsessed," he told me one night after I'd spent hours making homemade gluten-free chicken nuggets that Sophie could safely eat. "Not everything needs to be about her condition." His words hurt deeply. How could protecting our child's health be considered an obsession? But rather than fighting, I tried harder to make our new normal work for everyone. I learnt to make gluten-free versions of Mark's favorite meals. I created a meal plan that would accommodate both Sophie's needs and Mark's preferences. 6 months after Sophie's diagnosis, I found texts on Mark's phone from someone named Jennifer. The messages were clearly romantic, filled with inside jokes and plans to meet. But what hurt almost as much as the betrayal were Jennifer's comments about me. "Your wife sounds so controlling with all this gluten drama. Most of these allergies are just in people's heads anyway." When confronted, Mark admitted to the affair with his co-worker. He said that Jennifer understood the pressure he was under and didn't make everything so complicated all the time. The words cut deep. I had been fighting so hard to keep our daughter healthy while he was complaining to another woman about how difficult I was making his life. Our divorce proceedings were surprisingly swift. Mark didn't fight for primary custody, agreeing that Sophie should live mainly with me while he took weekend visitations. I suspect Jennifer had influenced this decision too, not wanting a child with special needs around full-time. From the beginning, I tried to make the custody arrangement work smoothly for Sophie's sake. I would pack carefully prepared gluten-free meals and snacks for her weekend visits with Mark. I created detailed instruction sheets about safe foods and restaurants with gluten-free options. I even gave him a dedicated set of cooking utensils to keep at his apartment to avoid cross-contamination. Despite these efforts, Sophie would often come home from her father's house with stomach aches and fatigue. When I gently questioned her, she would say things like, "Daddy and Jennifer said one cookie wouldn't hurt me," or "They said you worry too much about what I eat." I tried calling Mark to address these issues. Sophie was up all night with stomach pains after coming home yesterday, I explained. "Did she eat something with gluten at your place?" "Miranda, you need to relax," he responded dismissively. "She was fine when she was with me. Maybe she's just stressed from going back and forth between houses." I emailed him articles about celiac disease. I invited him to Sophie's doctor appointments. I even suggested we attend a support group for parents of children with celiac together. But Mark remained resistant, insisting that I was exaggerating the situation. As the months went on, my anxiety about Sophie's visits with Mark grew stronger. Each Friday when she left, I would worry the entire weekend. Each Sunday when she returned, I would scrutinize her for symptoms of gluten exposure. The pattern was becoming clear, and I felt increasingly helpless to protect my daughter when she wasn't under my roof. The first time I met Jennifer was during a custody handover at the local park. She was tall and fit with the polished look of someone who spent considerable time on their appearance. She wore expensive athleisure clothes and had the defined muscles of a regular gym goer. Mark introduced her awkwardly, and I forced a smile for Sophie's sake. "So you're the famous Miranda," Jennifer said with a tight smile. "Mark has told me so much about you." I doubted those things were positive, but I remained civil. "Nice to meet you. I've included a list of safe restaurants and some emergency contact information in Sophie's backpack." Jennifer rolled her eyes slightly. "I'm sure we'll be fine. We're just going to have a normal fun weekend without all the fuss." That fuss she referred to so dismissively was what kept my daughter healthy, but I bit my tongue. This wasn't the time or place for that conversation. Sophie was watching, and I didn't want to create tension that would make her weekend uncomfortable. As the weeks passed, Sophie began returning from visits with stories that raised alarm bells. "Jennifer says lots of people think they have food allergies, but they're just picky," she told me one Sunday evening. "She says you're just being dramatic, and that's why Daddy left." My heart broke hearing those words from my 8-year-old daughter. Not only was Jennifer undermining Sophie's health needs, but she was poisoning my child against me. Still, I tried to respond calmly. "Honey, celiac disease isn't an allergy, it's an autoimmune condition. Your body attacks itself when you eat gluten. That's why we have to be so careful, and the reason Daddy and I aren't together anymore is complicated, but it wasn't because of your special diet." The evidence of gluten exposure became increasingly obvious. I would find crumbs from regular bread in Sophie's backpack. She would come home with telltale symptoms, the distinctive rash on her elbows, dark circles under her eyes, complaints of stomach pain and fatigue. Once she even vomited through the night after returning from a weekend visit. I decided to confront Mark directly. I called when I knew Sophie would be at school, wanting to have this conversation in private. "Mark, Sophie is getting sick after every weekend with you. She's being exposed to gluten and it's damaging her intestines. This isn't a preference or me being controlling. This is a serious medical condition." His response left me stunned. "Jennifer says you're trying to control me through Sophie. She knows people whose doctors put them on gluten-free diets, and it was just a money-making scheme. Sophie seems fine when she's with us, then mysteriously gets sick when she comes back to you. Don't you think that's suspicious?" The implication that I was somehow making Sophie sick to prove a point was both infuriating and heartbreaking. How could he think I would ever harm our child? After getting nowhere with Mark, I attempted to reach out to Jennifer directly. I thought perhaps if she heard about celiac disease from me, with all the medical evidence, she might understand the seriousness of the situation. This backfired spectacularly. I later discovered that Jennifer had posted screenshots of my educational polite text message on her social media accounts, with the caption, "When your boyfriend's ex tries to control what happens in your home, "Not today, honey." Her followers, apparently fellow fitness enthusiasts, commented with laughing emojis and stories about helicopter parents they knew. I also discovered that Jennifer had quite a following on Instagram as a fitness influencer who promoted clean eating, but clearly had no actual nutrition education. She regularly posted content mocking made-up food sensitivities and advocating that mental toughness could overcome most health issues. In one particularly hurtful post, she referenced parents who use their kids' fake allergies to get attention and control everyone around them. Seeing Sophie's health turned into social media fodder was the final straw. I made an appointment with Sophie's pediatric gastroenterologist and explained what was happening. The doctor was deeply concerned and documented Sophie's recurring symptoms after visitations. She wrote a letter explicitly stating that even small amounts of gluten could cause significant damage to Sophie's intestines, which could lead to malnutrition, growth problems, and increased risk of other autoimmune disorders. Armed with this documentation, I requested a mediation session to discuss modifying our custody agreement. I didn't want to take away Mark's time with Sophie, but I needed to ensure her health was protected during those visits. Mark showed up to mediation with a combative attitude. "This is ridiculous," he stated immediately. "Miranda is trying to micromanage my time with Sophie and make me jump through hoops. Next, she'll be claiming Sophie needs some special water or air." The mediator fortunately took the doctor's documentation seriously and suggested a modified agreement where Mark would agree to maintain a completely gluten-free environment during Sophie's visits, complete a celiac education course at the local hospital, and document all foods Sophie consumed while in his care. Mark rejected these suggestions outright, becoming increasingly defensive and uncooperative. "This is just Miranda trying to control me. Sophie is fine. A little bread isn't going to kill her." Meanwhile, Sophie was developing anxiety around food and visits with her father. She started asking detailed questions about ingredients before eating anything. She would call me from Mark's house asking if certain foods were safe. Sometimes she would simply refuse to eat during her visits, saying her stomach hurt too much. Her school performance was suffering too. Her teacher noted that she seemed tired on Mondays and had trouble concentrating. Sophie, who had always loved school, started asking to stay home because she didn't feel well. I began documenting everything meticulously: Sophie's symptoms after visits, her school absences, our communications with Mark about her diet, the doctor's ongoing concerns. I didn't want to go to court, but I was becoming increasingly convinced that legal intervention might be the only way to protect Sophie's health. The emotional toll on me was significant. I had sleepless nights worrying about long-term damage to Sophie's body from repeated gluten exposure. I felt guilty that I couldn't protect her when she wasn't with me. I questioned whether I should have fought harder for supervised visitation during the divorce. Most of all, I grieved that Sophie was caught in the middle of a situation that was putting her health at risk. It was a Friday afternoon in October when Mark picked up Sophie for their regular weekend visit. This particular weekend was concerning because Mark had mentioned they were planning a small trip to a nearby tourist town, their first overnight excursion since the divorce. I had prepared more extensively than usual, packing 3 days' worth of safe meals and snacks. I included a detailed meal plan, a list of restaurant chains with gluten-free options in the area they were visiting, and emergency contact information for the local hospital. I even called ahead to a few restaurants in the tourist town to confirm their gluten-free preparation practices and included those notes. "All this food is unnecessary," Mark commented as he loaded the bags into his car. "We're not going to the wilderness, Miranda. There are grocery stores where we're going." "I know, but this way Sophie has guaranteed safe options," I explained. "Remember, even a small amount of cross-contamination can make her sick." Mark sighed dramatically, but took the bags. Jennifer waited in the car, not even bothering to wave hello. Sophie hugged me tightly before climbing into the back seat, her small face already looking worried. "Call me if you need anything, sweetheart," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "Have a wonderful time." I spent the evening cleaning the house to distract myself from worrying. Around 8 o'clock that night, my phone rang. It was Sophie and she was crying. "Mommy, my tummy really hurts," she sobbed, "and I feel like I'm going to throw up." "Where are you, honey?" I asked, already grabbing my car keys. "In the bathroom at Pizza Palace," she whispered. Daddy and Jennifer wanted pizza, and Jennifer said they had gluten-free crust, but my tummy really hurts now, and I think maybe it wasn't the right kind. My heart raced. "Is the bathroom near the front of the restaurant? Can you go tell Daddy you need me to come get you?" Jennifer said. "I'm just being dramatic like you," Sophie cried. "She said I need to toughen up." "Text me the restaurant address," I instructed, trying to keep my voice calm despite my rising panic. I'm coming right now. The pizza palace was about 30 minutes from my house. I made it there in 20, driving as fast as I safely could. When I arrived, I rushed inside and immediately spotted Mark and Jennifer sitting at a booth. Sophie was not with them. "Where is Sophie?" I demanded, approaching their table. Mark looked surprised to see me. "She's in the bathroom. She said her stomach was bothering her." She called me crying in pain, I said, my voice shaking with anger and fear. "What did she eat?" Jennifer interjected before Mark could answer. "She had pizza just like everyone else. The waitress said it was gluten-free." I turned and rushed to the women's bathroom, finding Sophie curled up in a ball on the floor of a stall. Her face was pale and sweaty, and she was clutching her stomach. "Oh, baby," I murmured, kneeling beside her. "Let's get you out of here." I helped Sophie to her feet and guided her out of the bathroom. Mark and Jennifer were now standing near the restaurant entrance, Mark looking concerned while Jennifer appeared annoyed. "She was fine until she called you," Jennifer said accusingly. "It's all in her head. You've trained her to think she's sick." "She has celiac disease," I said through gritted teeth. "This isn't psychosomatic. She is having a real physical reaction to gluten." "The waitress said it was gluten-free crust," Mark insisted. "Did you specifically ask if they have protocols to prevent cross-contamination? Did you check if they use separate utensils and preparation areas?" I asked already. Knowing the answer from Sophie's condition, Mark looked blank. "It said gluten-free on the menu." Sophie suddenly doubled over and vomited on the restaurant floor. Several nearby diners gasped and moved away. Sophie began to cry from pain and embarrassment. "I'm taking her to the emergency room," I announced, picking up my daughter. She felt lighter than she should, her body trembling against mine. "You're overreacting," Jennifer started, but Mark cut her off. "Maybe we should get her checked out," he said, finally showing some concern. "I've got her," I replied coldly. "You two enjoy the rest of your pizza." The drive to the hospital was tense, with Sophie crying softly in the back seat. By the time we arrived at the emergency room, she was vomiting repeatedly into a bag I had grabbed from the car. The triage nurse took one look at her and moved us to a treatment room immediately. The ER doctor arrived quickly, and I explained Sophie's celiac disease and likely gluten exposure. They started an IV to treat her dehydration from vomiting and gave her medication for the pain and nausea. Blood tests were ordered to check her antibody levels, which would confirm recent gluten exposure. About an hour into our hospital visit, Mark arrived alone, looking shaken. "How is she?" he asked, hovering in the doorway of the treatment room. "They're admitting her overnight," I said, not looking at him. "Her reaction is severe. The doctor is concerned about the intensity of her symptoms." "I don't understand," Mark said, running his hand through his hair. "It was supposed to be gluten-free pizza. Even if the crust was gluten-free, which I doubt cross-contamination happens easily in pizza restaurants. They use the same ovens, utensils, and preparation surfaces. Regular flour is airborne and gets everywhere. That's why I packed all that food for her, Mark." The doctor returned then and asked what exactly Sophie had eaten. When Mark admitted it was pizza from a regular pizza chain, the doctor's expression grew serious. "Most of those places can't guarantee no cross-contamination," she explained. "Their gluten-free crusts are mainly for people who prefer it as a dietary choice, not for people with celiac disease. For someone with severe celiac like Sophie, those environments are extremely high risk." "But she seemed fine right after eating it," Mark protested weakly. "Symptoms can take anywhere from minutes to hours to appear," the doctor explained. "And repeated exposure to gluten, even in small amounts, can cause cumulative damage to the intestines. Based on her antibody levels, I suspect this isn't the first recent exposure." Mark's face flushed with what seemed like shame, but Jennifer, who had now appeared in the doorway, still looked skeptical. "Lots of kids have stomach bugs," she said dismissively. "Miranda is making a mountain out of a molehill." The doctor turned to Jennifer with a stern expression. "This is not a stomach bug. Sophie has elevated tissue transglutaminase antibodies consistent with recent gluten exposure. She's experiencing an autoimmune response that is causing inflammation and damage to her small intestine. This is not psychosomatic or exaggerated." Jennifer fell silent, but I could tell from her expression that she still didn't believe it, or perhaps didn't want to believe her role in Sophie's condition. The doctor continued, addressing Mark directly. "Celiac disease is not a preference or a fad diet. Each exposure to gluten triggers an immune response that damages the intestinal lining. Repeated exposure can lead to permanent damage, malnutrition, growth issues, and increased risk of other autoimmune disorders and even certain cancers long term. This is a serious medical condition that requires strict adherence to a gluten-free diet." As the doctor's words sank in, I felt a complex mix of emotions rage at Mark and Jennifer for their negligence, vindication that a medical professional was confirming what I had been saying all along, and heartbreak that Sophie had to suffer to make them understand. After the doctor left, Sophie, who had been quiet during the explanation, looked at her father with tears in her eyes. "I told them my tummy hurt. After the first bite, Daddy," she said softly. "Jennifer said I was being picky like Mommy and that I should eat what everyone else was eating." Mark looked stricken. Jennifer stepped out of the room without a word. That night, I slept in the uncomfortable chair beside Sophie's hospital bed, watching the IV fluids drip and listening to the beeping of the monitors. Mark had left after Sophie fell asleep, saying Jennifer was waiting in the car. As I sat in the dim light of the hospital room, I knew that something had to change. I could no longer trust Mark to protect our daughter's health, and I was done trying to make him understand through gentle education and compromise. The morning after Sophie was discharged from the hospital, I called a family law attorney. I had consulted with several during our divorce, but had ultimately handled that process without legal representation to save money. This time, I knew I needed professional help. The attorney, Ms. Harrington, listened carefully as I detailed the history of Mark's negligence regarding Sophie's celiac disease, culminating in the hospitalization incident. I showed her the documentation I had been keeping, medical records, text messages, notes from Sophie's teachers about her condition after weekend visits. "This is a clear case for an emergency modification of custody," Ms. Harrington said after reviewing my materials. "Your ex-husband's negligence has resulted in actual harm to your child documented by medical professionals. We can file today." I felt both relief and sadness as I signed the paperwork. This wasn't how I had wanted things to be. Despite everything, I had hoped Mark would eventually understand the seriousness of Sophie's condition and step up as a responsible co-parent. Just as we were finishing the paperwork, my phone rang. It was Mark, and he sounded angry. "Miranda, what the hell?" he shouted when I answered. "Jennifer just told me you're planning to use this incident to take Sophie away from me. You've been waiting for an opportunity like this, haven't you? Mark, Sophie ended up in the hospital because you and Jennifer ignored her medical needs," I replied, trying to stay calm. "This isn't about me trying to keep Sophie from you. It's about keeping her safe." "It was one mistake," he argued. "You've blown this completely out of proportion, just like Jennifer said." "One mistake," I repeated incredulously. "Sophie has been coming home sick from your house for months. I've sent you research, invited you to doctor's appointments, packed safe food that you apparently don't use. This hospitalization was just the culmination of ongoing negligence." Mark continued to argue, but I cut him short. "I've filed for an emergency modification of the custody arrangement. You'll be served with papers soon." The following week passed in a blur of legal consultations and comforting Sophie, who was still recovering physically and emotionally from the hospitalization. When the day came for Mark's scheduled weekend pickup, he didn't show. He didn't call either. Sophie waited by the window with her packed bag, her face falling as the hours passed. "Maybe Daddy forgot," she suggested, though we both knew that wasn't the case. I called and texted Mark multiple times but received no response. Finally, late that evening, I received a text from an unknown number that turned out to be Jennifer. "Mark and I left for our vacation early. He'll contact you when we return next week. He needs space after your legal threats." I was stunned. Mark had abandoned his visitation with Sophie, leaving his daughter waiting and confused to go on vacation with Jennifer. The same vacation they had been starting when Sophie got sick. And he didn't even have the courage to tell me or Sophie himself. The emergency court hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. When the day arrived, I was nervous but resolute. Sophie was in school, and I had arranged for a friend to pick her up in case the proceedings ran long. Mark didn't show up for the hearing. His absence spoke volumes to the judge, who reviewed my documentation and the hospital records with a grave expression. "Based on the evidence presented and the respondent's failure to appear, I'm issuing a temporary order modifying the existing custody arrangement," the judge announced. "Mr. Fields will be limited to supervised visitation, only to take place at the County Family Centre after completion of a court-approved parent education program specifically addressing children with medical conditions." I felt a complex mix of emotions leaving the courthouse. Relief that Sophie would be protected, but sadness about the broken relationship between father and daughter. I had never wanted to limit Mark's time with Sophie. I had only wanted him to take her health seriously. Sophie's reaction to the news that she wouldn't be staying at her father's house for a while was heartbreaking. "Does Daddy not want to see me anymore?" she asked, her small voice quivering. "Your daddy loves you. I assured her, choosing my words carefully. But he made some choices that weren't safe for your health, so the judge said he needs to learn more about taking care of someone with celiac disease before you can stay with him again. Sophie nodded solemnly. Because of the pizza that made me sick. Yes, and some other things. It's not your fault, sweetie. None of this is your fault. In the days that followed, Sophie became quieter, more withdrawn. Her school counselor, Ms. Rivera, offered to meet with her weekly to help her process her feelings. Children often blame themselves when parents separate or when there's conflict, she explained to me. Sophie needs reassurance that she didn't cause these problems, especially since her medical condition is at the center of the dispute. Almost a week after the hearing, Mark finally called. He sounded subdued, different from the angry man who had called me before. I just got back and found out about the court order, he said. Miranda, I never thought it would go this far. Where have you been? Mark, Sophie was waiting for you last Friday. She thought you forgot about her. There was a pause before he answered. Jennifer thought we should go ahead with our vacation plans. She said you were using the hospital incident to manipulate me, that I needed to stand my ground. And you listened to her instead of checking on your daughter, instead of showing up to the court, hearing about your parental rights. Another pause. Jennifer and I are taking some time apart. She thinks I should have backed her up more at the hospital. Said I threw her under the bus when I admitted the pizza might have made Sophie sick. I wasn't surprised. Jennifer had shown her true colors throughout this ordeal, prioritizing being right over Sophie's well-being. The court-ordered program starts next week, Mark continued. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this, Miranda. I messed up. I chose wrong. I wasn't ready to forgive him, but I acknowledged his intention to complete the program. Sophie needs a father who puts her health first, Mark, not one who disappears when things get tough. After hanging up, I sat in silence, processing the conversation. Mark seemed genuinely regretful, but I had heard promises from him before. Only time would tell if he was truly ready to change his approach to Sophie's condition. In the meantime, I focused on helping Sophie heal both physically and emotionally. I joined a support group for single parents of children with medical conditions, finding comfort in sharing experiences with others who understood the unique challenges we faced. It was at one of these meetings that I met Sarah, whose son also had celiac disease. She approached me after the session, and we bonded immediately over the difficulties of ensuring gluten-free environments for our children. It's like being a detective and a bodyguard all the time, Sarah said with her understanding smile. Exhausting, but necessary. Sarah quickly became a close friend and valuable support person. She understood my vigilance in a way others couldn't, never making me feel overprotective or paranoid about Sophie's needs. With the recommendation from Sophie's doctor and Ms. Rivera, Sophie also began seeing a child therapist to process her feelings of betrayal and abandonment. Dr. Matthew specialized in children with chronic medical conditions and helped Sophie understand that her father's behavior wasn't her fault. I found myself in therapy too, working through my own complicated feelings. The guilt that had plagued me, wondering if I could have prevented Sophie's hospitalization somehow. The anger at Mark and Jennifer for their negligence. The fear about Sophie's long-term health after repeated gluten exposures under Mark's care. My therapist helped me see that while I couldn't control Mark's actions, I had done everything possible to protect Sophie, including taking the difficult step of legal intervention when necessary. As the weeks passed, Sophie's health improved dramatically without the constant cycles of gluten exposure and recovery. Her energy returned, her school performance improved, and the dark circles under her eyes faded. Her pediatric gastroenterologist noted that her antibody levels were finally normalizing, indicating her intestines were healing. About 2 months after the court hearing, when I felt emotionally stronger, I briefly tried dating again. A colleague introduced me to her brother, a kind elementary school principal, who took me to dinner a few times. But I quickly realized I wasn't ready and that Sophie's stability needed to be my priority. It was around this time that I received a surprising call from Mark. Can we talk in person? He asked. Not with Sophie, just us. There are things I need to say that shouldn't be over the phone. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop halfway between our homes. When I arrived, Mark was already there, looking more disheveled than I had seen him in years. The polished finance professional had been replaced by someone who appeared to have missed several nights of sleep. Thank you for meeting me, he began awkwardly. I've completed the court program about celiac disease, and I want you to know I understand now how serious this is. The nutritionist showed us what happens inside Sophie's body when she consumes gluten. It's not just a stomachache she can tough out. I nodded, waiting for him to continue. I owe you an apology, he said, looking me in the eyes for the first time. Jennifer convinced me that you were weaponizing Sophie's diagnosis to control me after the divorce. She said all my friends thought you were manipulative and that I needed to stand up to you. And you believed that? Mark sighed heavily. I wanted to believe it was simpler than it actually is, that Sophie could just eat normal food sometimes and be fine, that you were exaggerating. It was easier than accepting that our daughter has a serious medical condition that requires constant vigilance. His honesty surprised me, but it didn't erase the harm done. Sophie could have avoided a lot of suffering if you had listened sooner. I know, he said quietly, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make that up to her if you'll let me be part of her life again. I left that coffee shop with mixed feelings. Mark seemed genuinely remorseful and better informed about celiac disease. But trust once broken is not easily rebuilt, especially when it involves your child's well-being. The court eventually modified the custody order, allowing Mark to progress from supervised visitation at the family centre to day visits at his apartment. I established strict boundaries about food, no meals during these initial visits. I would feed Sophie before she went to Mark's, and she would return before her next meal. Mark accepted these terms without complaint, seemingly understanding the trust he needed to rebuild. He completed not only the required court program, but also an additional celiac education course offered by the local hospital. He attended Sophie's next gastroenterology appointment, asking thoughtful questions and taking notes. Sophie was cautious during the first few visits with her father, but gradually began to relax as she saw Mark taking her condition seriously. He removed all gluten-containing products from his apartment and showed Sophie his newly organized kitchen with dedicated gluten-free preparation areas. Daddy has special green cutting boards just for my food, Sophie reported after one visit, and he labelled all his cabinets with Safe for Sophie stickers. These small steps indicated Mark was finally making Sophie's health a priority, though I remained vigilant. I would quiz Sophie gently after visits, asking what activities they did and if any food was involved without alarming her or making her feel responsible for monitoring her father. After 3 months of successful day visits, Mark asked if Sophie could stay for dinner. He had prepared a detailed meal plan for my approval, including brands of ingredients and preparation methods. He even suggested I provide any specialty items Sophie might need. This level of consideration was what I had wanted from the beginning, and it allowed me to cautiously agree to extending the visits to include a meal. When Sophie returned from that dinner visit, she was healthy and happy. Dad checked every single label, she reported proudly, and he washed his hands 3 times when he was cooking. 6 months after the hospitalization incident, the court approved Mark's petition for an overnight visit. I spent hours preparing detailed instructions, emergency contacts, and safe food options. My anxiety was through the roof as I dropped Sophie off, but I reminded myself that Mark had demonstrated consistent improvement in understanding Sophie's needs. The next morning, when I picked Sophie up, she was still healthy, without any signs of gluten exposure. Dad made gluten-free pancakes for breakfast, she told me excitedly, and they were really good, not gummy at all. This simple report brought tears to my eyes, not just because Sophie was physically well, but because she sounded like a normal child, excited about breakfast with her dad, not a patient afraid of being made sick by her food. My feelings about Mark remained complicated. The trust I once had in him was gone, replaced by cautious optimism that he was finally putting Sophie's needs first. I no longer harbored romantic feelings for him, but I appreciated his growth as a co-parent. Around this time, I heard through mutual friends that Mark had refused contact from Jennifer. She had apparently reached out several times after their breakup, but Mark had maintained his distance, telling friends that he needed to focus on being a better father. As Sophie approached her 9th birthday, we faced the first major celebration since the divorce and custody modifications. I suggested a small party at my house with a few of Sophie's friends, and to my surprise, Mark offered to help. He researched gluten-free bakeries and found one that could make a safe birthday cake that actually tasted good. The birthday party was tense at times, with Mark and I carefully navigating our new co-parenting dynamic in front of friends and family. But we managed to keep the focus on Sophie's happiness, which was what mattered most. Sophie was flourishing in other ways too. Her health improvements allowed her to join the science club at school, something she had been too fatigued to consider before. She made new friends who were understanding about her dietary needs, partly because Sophie herself had become more confident in explaining celiac disease. I found myself taking on new challenges as well. The support group I had joined for parents of children with medical conditions was looking for new leadership, and I volunteered to help organize meetings and resources. I started a blog sharing our experiences and offering practical advice for navigating celiac disease in childhood, particularly in divided households. An unexpected development came when Mark's parents, who had been somewhat distant since our divorce, reached out to learn more about Sophie's condition. They had initially sided with Mark, believing I was being overprotective. But after the hospitalization, they wanted to understand how to create a safe environment for Sophie during their visits. I spent an afternoon at their home helping them reorganize their kitchen and identifying hidden sources of gluten in their pantry. Mark's mother, who had once dismissed celiac disease as a fad, now took careful notes and asked thoughtful questions. "We should have listened to you sooner," she admitted as I was leaving. "We just didn't want to believe Sophie had a condition this serious." As the holiday season approached, we faced another test of our co-parenting relationship. In previous years, Sophie had gotten sick after holiday meals at Mark's family gatherings. This year, Mark suggested we coordinate to ensure all family celebrations were safe for Sophie. I told my mum that either the entire meal is gluten-free or Sophie and I will eat our own food separately, he informed me. "I'm not taking any chances with cross-contamination." This proactive approach was a welcome change from the Mark who had once accused me of being dramatic about Sophie's dietary needs. Another positive sign came when Mark mentioned he had started therapy to work through his own issues. "I need to understand why I was so resistant to accepting Sophie's diagnosis," he explained, "and why I let Jennifer's opinions override what doctors and you were telling me. I don't want to make those kinds of mistakes again." While I was still cautious, I recognized that Mark was making genuine efforts to become a better father and co-parent. He was demonstrating through consistent actions, not just words, that Sophie's well-being was his priority. For the first time since our divorce, I felt we were working together as a team for Sophie's benefit, rather than as adversaries. The path forward wouldn't be perfect, but it seemed navigable in a way it hadn't before. 1 year after Sophie's hospitalization, we marked what I privately considered an anniversary, though not one to celebrate. Rather, it was a moment to reflect on how far we had come from that frightening night in the emergency room. Sophie was thriving in a way that filled my heart with joy. She had been symptom-free for months, her growth had accelerated to catch up with her peers, and her energy levels were consistently high. Her doctor was pleased with her progress, noting that her intestines showed significant healing on the latest tests. Mark had evolved into a responsible co-parent who meticulously followed all medical guidelines for Sophie's care. He had created a completely gluten-free household, eliminating any risk of cross-contamination during Sophie's now regular overnight stays. He attended all medical appointments, asked informed questions, and implemented any new recommendations immediately. As for me, I had journeyed from resentment to cautious forgiveness. The anger that had once consumed me had gradually transformed into something more productive. I would never forget the suffering Sophie endured because of Mark and Jennifer's negligence, but I had learned that holding on to that anger only added another burden to my already challenging life. The path to healing had been painful but necessary for all of us. Sophie had needed to see her medical needs taken seriously by both parents. Mark had needed to recognize the real consequences of dismissing expert advice. And I had needed to learn that advocating fiercely for my child didn't make me controlling or overprotective, it made me a good mother. Sophie, with the resilience of childhood, had perhaps the most profound perspective on our journey. "Sometimes people don't believe things they can't see," she told me one evening as I tucked her into bed. "Daddy couldn't see inside my tummy, so he didn't believe it was really hurting." Her wisdom beyond her years often amazed me. She had found a way to understand her father's past behavior without excusing it, and to forgive without forgetting to protect herself. Looking back, I realized that I had won our custody battle, not by punishing Mark or keeping Sophie from him, but by standing firm in my advocacy for her health. The victory wasn't about court orders or legal documents. It was about Sophie finally having two parents who prioritized her well-being above all else. This experience had taught me countless lessons about advocacy. When you're fighting for a child who cannot fully advocate for themselves, documentation and professional support make all the difference. Every doctor's note, every symptom journal entry, every email exchange had contributed to protecting Sophie when words alone weren't enough. I had discovered strength I didn't know I possessed during those crisis moments. The night I drove to the restaurant to rescue Sophie, I had been terrified but resolute. That courage had carried me through difficult conversations, tense court hearings, and the emotional aftermath of watching my child suffer. Our family had been rebuilt with clear boundaries and mutual respect. It wasn't the family unit I had envisioned when Sophie was born, but it was functional and healthy in its own way. Mark and I communicated directly and honestly about Sophie's needs. We coordinated calendars and medical information efficiently. We even occasionally shared meals together for Sophie's benefit, though these were always at my house, where I could ensure food safety. In my personal life, I had recently met David, a science teacher at a neighbouring school. Unlike previous brief attempts at dating, this relationship felt promising. David's nephew had food allergies, so he already understood the vigilance required around certain foods. He asked thoughtful questions about celiac disease, and never made me feel overprotective for the precautions I took with Sophie. Sophie's relationship with her father had improved dramatically as well. The trust that had been damaged was slowly being rebuilt through Mark's consistent demonstration that he took her health seriously. She no longer called me from his house to check if foods were safe. She trusted him to have verified ingredients already. My blog about co-parenting a child with medical needs had grown into a valuable resource for other families. I received messages from parents in similar situations, thanking me for the practical advice and emotional support my writing provided. What had begun as a way to process my own experiences had become a way to help others navigate their challenges. The perspective I had gained through this difficult journey was perhaps the most valuable outcome. Sometimes losing a marriage saves a child. As painful as my divorce from Mark had been, it had ultimately led to changes that protected Sophie. Had we stayed together with the same dynamics in place with Mark, dismissing Sophie's diagnosis, and me fighting to be heard, Sophie might have suffered even more. I had also learnt to trust my maternal instincts despite others' doubts. When Mark, Jennifer, and even some doctors had suggested I was overreacting to Sophie's symptoms, something inside me knew better. That confidence in my own perceptions had grown stronger through this experience, and I would never again allow anyone to make me doubt what I knew about my child's health. The community we had built around supporting Sophie had become another unexpected blessing. Her teachers were vigilant about classroom activities involving food. Her friends' parents always checked with me before playdates. Her doctors took my observations seriously. This network of caring adults created a safer world for Sophie to navigate. As I reflected on our journey, I realized that my approach to the conflict had evolved significantly. Initially, I had been focused on proving Mark wrong on winning arguments and custody battles. But eventually, I understood that protecting Sophie's peace was more important than winning any fight. Sometimes that meant swallowing my pride. Sometimes it meant setting firm boundaries, but always it meant keeping Sophie's well-being at the center of every decision. I wonder how many of you watching have had to fight for someone you love when others didn't believe you. Maybe it was a child with an invisible condition like Sophie, or perhaps an elderly parent whose symptoms were dismissed. If you've been in those shoes, leave a comment below sharing how you advocated successfully. And if you're in that battle right now, hit subscribe for more stories about standing firm when it matters most. Remember that sharing these experiences helps others feel less alone. So please consider liking this video and sharing it with someone who might need to hear that their advocacy matters. Thank you for listening to our story, and remember, true victory isn't about defeating others. It's about protecting those who depend on us even when it's difficult.